Yellowstone National Park is known for its beauty, but it's also a place of danger. Over the years, many visitors have lost their lives in ways that are both shocking and tragic. In this video, we'll look at 5 of the worst deaths in Yellowstone's history. Real stories of people who made one wrong move, underestimated the power of nature, or were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was June 7, 2016 in Yellowstone National Park. 23-year-old Colin Nathaniel Scott was ready for adventure. He had come with his sister, Sable, both excited to explore the wonders they had read about, seen in pictures, and now stood in awe of. Yellowstone, with its alien landscapes and surreal beauty, felt like another planet. But what they didn't know, what no one ever truly expects, is that they were walking into a nightmare. They entered Norris Geyser Basin, one of the most dangerous and unpredictable places in the park. Boiling pools, thin crusts, acidic water that can eat through bone, but like many before them, they were lured by curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, by the thrill of breaking a rule. They stepped off the boardwalk, hot potting. That was the goal, an illegal and reckless practice of soaking in the thermal springs, not realizing just how deceptive these pools really are. They don't bubble like lava. They don't scream danger. They shimmer. They glow. They look inviting. But beneath the surface, death waits in silence. While searching for the perfect spring, Colin walked just a bit too far. The ground beneath him crumbled, and in an instant, he was gone. He had fallen into a scalding, acidic, hot spring. Sable screamed. She could only watch, helpless and horrified, as her brother vanished into the steam. There was no time, no second chance. She ran to find help, desperate, frantic. But Yellowstone doesn't wait for rescue. By the time rangers reached the scene, it was already over. The water was over 199 degf, laced with chemicals and sulfuric acid, so corrosive that it had dissolved nearly everything. His body could not be recovered. Rangers found only a few belongings, a wallet, a pair of flip-flops, the rest gone, melted into the earth as if he had never been there. Park spokesperson Carissa Reed confirmed what everyone feared. The conditions were so extreme, so unforgiving, that recovery was impossible. Colin had loved nature. He wasn't some careless thrill seeker. He had just graduated from Pacific University with honors and was preparing to begin a doctorate program in psychology. He had volunteered at the Jackson Bottom Wetlands Preserve, teaching others about wildlife and conservation. He was bright, compassionate, full of potential, and yet in one single misstep, Yellowstone swallowed him whole. He became the park's 22nd fatality tied to hot springs since it opened in 1872, and still, people don't listen. The danger signs are everywhere, bright, bold, but many visitors step off the path anyway, thinking they know better. They don't see the risk. They see adventure, Instagram moments, a chance to soak in nature's hot tub, but these are not safe waters. They are boiling, acidic, and completely unforgiving. The earth around them is fragile. What looks like solid ground may be paper thin. Colin's death wasn't just tragic, it was horrifying. It happened so fast, so violently, and yet so silently. His family was devastated. His friends struggled to make sense of it. A young man with a future so bright, gone in a blink because of a single decision, because of a moment's curiosity, because the rules felt more like suggestions.
Justice almost a decade in the making. Heather Mack has been sentenced to almost 26 years in prison.
The Oak Park woman pleaded guilty to helping kill her own mother during a vacation in Bali in 2014.
It was August 12, 2014 in Nusa Dua, Bali. At the opulent St. Regis Resort, 62-year-old Sheila Mack was supposed to be enjoying a peaceful vacation with her daughter, 18-year-old Heather. But behind the silk sheets and ocean breeze, something was terribly off. Sheila wasn't just any tourist. Back home in Chicago, she was a respected figure in elite circles, the widow of renowned jazz composer James L. Mack, and someone who, despite her wealth, was fiercely protective of her daughter. And Heather? Well, Heather had secrets. She was pregnant. She hadn't told her mother everything. She didn't just bring her baggage to Bali. She brought her boyfriend. 21-year-old Tommy Schaefer arrived quietly, slipping into the resort with a business-class ticket secretly purchased using Sheila's credit card. Sheila had no idea he was coming. She'd spent months trying to separate her daughter from him, moving houses, changing routines, even uprooting her life in an attempt to shield Heather from what she believed was a dangerous relationship. But Heather and Tommy weren't ready to let go. In fact, they had a plan. The night Tommy arrived, hotel surveillance caught a tense scene in the lobby. He and Sheila arguing, their body language tight with fury. What followed wasn't impulsive, it was months in the making. Back in Chicago, Heather and Tommy had exchanged chilling text messages about killing Sheila. They'd even offered $50,000 to Tommy's cousin to find someone to carry it out. Tommy would later claim that during the argument, Sheila threatened to harm the unborn baby. "That's when," he said. He snapped. He grabbed a heavy metal fruit bowl from the room and began to strike Sheila again and again until she collapsed, her face bloodied, her breath gone. The forensic evidence showed brutal facial injuries. Heather didn't stop him. She helped clean up. They wrapped Sheila's body in a hotel bed sheet, stuffed it into a suitcase. They had to force it shut, and in doing so, they broke her neck. They wheeled the suitcase through the pristine halls of the five-star resort. No one suspected a thing until the blood started leaking. A taxi driver noticed it first, red seeping from the suitcase into his trunk. Alarmed, he alerted hotel staff, who quickly called the police. But by the time officers arrived, Heather and Tommy had vanished. They fled to a nearby hotel, thinking maybe they'd bought themselves some time. They hadn't. Less than 24 hours later, they were caught. People back home were stunned. Between 2010 and 2013, police had been called to the Mack household a staggering 86 times. Domestic disturbances, missing person reports. Most of them involved Heather. She'd already spent time in juvenile detention, had psychiatric evaluations, and been known to lash out violently. But through it all, Sheila never gave up on her daughter. She tried everything: therapy, structure, even isolation. And yet, on this trip, the very one meant to rescue their bond, Heather sealed her mother's fate. Sheila had been recovering from a fall earlier in the trip. She was resting, vulnerable. That's when Heather booked Tommy's flight. Hours after he arrived, her mother was dead. When the case went to trial, the revelations kept coming. Heather wasn't some manipulated teen. She had been actively involved in the planning. The motive? Some believed it was control. Others pointed to greed. Heather thought she stood to inherit up to $11 million. That inheritance would later help fund her defense. $150,000 of it, in fact. Money from Sheila's own estate. Tommy was sentenced to 18 years. Heather, surprisingly, only got 10. In prison, she thrived in ways that seemed unsettling, joining dance groups, learning languages, even working as a translator. Tommy, on the other hand, struggled, isolated, beaten, angry. In a 2019 interview, he expressed remorse. Heather didn't, at least not at first. In 2017, she posted a video in which she said she didn't regret what happened. Then, in 2021, Heather walked out of prison early for good behavior. The moment she touched U.S. soil, federal agents were waiting. She was arrested again. In court, she finally apologized to her family. Her uncle Bill said it was the first time she'd done so, but even then, he wasn't sure she meant it. Today, Heather sits in a U.S. federal prison, sentenced to 26 years. Tommy is still locked up in Indonesia, and the little girl they brought into the world, Stella, is now 10, living with Sheila's niece in Colorado. She's cut off all contact with her mother. After years of fighting, Heather gave up her claim to the inheritance. That money now belongs to Stella. It was November 16th, 2018. 26-year-old John Allen Chow had spent years preparing for this moment. A devoted American missionary, he believed his life had one purpose: to bring the word of God to one of the most isolated communities on Earth, the Sentinelese tribe. They lived on North Sentinel Island, tucked into India's Andaman chain. Untouched by modern civilization, the Sentinelese had rejected contact for thousands of years. They didn't want help. They didn't want technology. They didn't want God. What they did want was to be left alone. But John couldn't walk away. He believed this was his calling. He had visited the Andaman Islands before in 2015 and 2016 studying, preparing, but this time he wouldn't watch from a distance. He would step onto their land. Despite strict Indian laws banning contact with the Sentinelese, John hired local fishermen for $325 to take him near the island under the cover of night. They were hesitant. They knew what had happened to others who tried, but John's faith was unwavering. On November 15th, he made his first approach by kayak. The fisherman stayed back as he paddled toward shore. "My name is John. I love you, and Jesus loves you," he called out. The tribe didn't wave. They raised their bows. Still, John offered a fish, a peace gesture. Arrows flew. He turned and paddled back, heart pounding. That night, he wrote in his journal. He admitted fear. He wondered if he should leave. But then he wrote, "I think I could die." And later, "Lord, is this island Satan's last stronghold?" But he wasn't done. The next morning he returned with more gifts, a football, more fish, more hope. But again, he was met with hostility. That night he left a letter to his family. It was a farewell. He told them not to be angry, not at the tribe, not at God. He said he loved them and asked for forgiveness if he didn't return. November 16th, his final attempt. He paddled toward the island. No camera, no protection, just his Bible and conviction. The fishermen stayed back, barely able to see, and then they saw him fall. He was struck by arrows, dragged into the trees. His body vanished into the jungle. The fishermen fled. Back on the mainland, they reported what they had seen. Indian authorities confirmed his death, but made a difficult choice. His body would not be recovered. To return risked violence or exposing the tribe to deadly diseases. The world erupted. Some saw John as a martyr. Others called his actions reckless, an act of dangerous arrogance that could have devastated the tribe. Survival International condemned his mission. The Sentinelese, they argued, had survived because of their isolation and had every right to resist intrusion. John's family didn't lash out. They forgave those who killed him and stood by his beliefs. Still, tough questions lingered. Was this a tragedy of faith or a cautionary tale of cultural blindness? When does conviction become a violation? The fishermen were arrested for helping him. The Sentinelese, untouched by the law, were left alone, just as they had always wanted. Indian officials made it clear. The tribe acted in defense of their home. Years later, the debate lives on. Some say John Allen Chow died a hero. Others believe he should have never gone. It was a Sunday morning, August 17th, 2014, when the unthinkable happened at Yellowstone National Park. 8-year-old Zahara Aliyari from Poway, California, had been hiking along the brink of the Lower Falls Trail, one of Yellowstone's most iconic spots. Zahara was a curious, bright-eyed little girl, adventurous, fearless, always eager to explore, but in a place like Yellowstone, even the smallest misstep can become fatal. As her family moved along the narrow trail, Zahara stepped just slightly off the marked path. Maybe she wanted a better look. Maybe she was caught in a moment of wonder, but that one step was all it took. The ground beneath her was loose, unstable. It gave way instantly. No one had time to react. In a flash, Zahara slipped, and then she was gone. Her small body tumbled down the steep canyon wall, over 500 feet straight down into a jagged, unforgiving gorge. Her family screamed. Other hikers watched helplessly. There was nothing anyone could do. The cliffs were too steep, the terrain too rugged. She had vanished in seconds. Emergency crews were called immediately, but even they knew what they were up against. A helicopter had to be brought in. Rescuers rappelled down into the canyon, fighting wind, gravity, and time, but it was too late. Zahara hadn't survived the fall. Back home in Poway, the news shattered an entire community. She was supposed to start 4th grade in just a few days. Her best friend, Kirsten, had even brought back a small bookmark from South Korea, a little surprise gift for Zahara, one she never got to give. Kirsten called her the sister she never had. They shared lunch, secrets, inside jokes, study sessions, and now, just like that, she was gone. The pain rippled through their school, their town. Counselors were brought in. A moment of silence was held. But how do you make sense of something so sudden, so senseless? And that week, the park didn't take just one life. Only days earlier, 22-year-old Darian Laddie from Georgia had been tubing with friends on the Yellowstone River. He wasn't wearing a life jacket. He lost control. The river pulled him under, fast, cold, merciless. His friends couldn't reach him. Search teams later found his body pinned under a rock, a quarter-mile downstream. Another young life lost, another family shattered. 2 tragedies in a single week. 2 families left with memories, questions, and unbearable silence. Yellowstone draws millions every year. People come for the beauty, the thrill, the escape. But the truth is, nature doesn't play favorites. It doesn't give warnings. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. Trails may be scenic, but they can also be deadly. Rivers are not lazy streams. They are powerful forces that don't forgive mistakes.
That breaking news is at Disney World. You're looking at the lake next to the Grand Floridian Hotel, where a 2-year-old boy was attacked and killed by an alligator.
It was Florida evening on June 14th, 2016. At Disney World's luxurious Grand Floridian Resort and Spa, the Graves family from Elkhorn, Nebraska was settling in for what should have been another magical night. They were on vacation, just like millions of families who dream of Disney, a place of joy, safety, imagination. 2-year-old Lane Thomas Graves was playing near the edge of the Seven Seas Lagoon. His big sister Ella was nearby. His parents, Matt and Melissa, were just a few feet away, watching as Disney's outdoor screening of Zootopia flickered across the night. Kids were laughing, families were relaxing. Nothing about that moment felt dangerous. And then everything changed. It was around 8:30 p.m., a time when most guests were winding down. But it was also when alligators become most active, silent, unpredictable, waiting. As Lane bent near the water's edge, a shadow moved beneath the surface. Then, without warning, an alligator estimated at 7 to 8 feet long lunged from the lagoon and seized him. The splash was deafening. His father, Matt, reacted instantly. He hurled himself into the water, adrenaline surging, trying to pry his little boy from the predator's grip. He fought, screamed, struggled against nature itself, but the alligator was too strong. In mere seconds, Lane was dragged into deeper water and vanished beneath the surface. What followed was a frantic, devastating search. Disney staff, local authorities, divers, and wildlife teams worked through the night. They combed the area tirelessly, but hope began to fade. And then, after 17 harrowing hours, divers found Lane's body, 6 feet underwater, just 15 yards from where he was taken. The autopsy confirmed what no parent should ever hear. Lane had drowned, his body bearing injuries from the attack. He hadn't wandered. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was just a curious toddler, taken in a blink. In the days that followed, grief swept the nation. People struggled to understand how this could have happened. At Disney, of all places, whispers turned into questions. Why weren't there clear warnings about alligators? Why did the signs only say no swimming? Why hadn't something been done sooner? It turned out guests had warned staff about alligators in the area before Lane's death, but no real action was taken. In response, Disney removed nearly 100 alligators from its properties, built barriers around the lagoon, and installed new signage warning of potential wildlife threats. But for the Graves family, the damage had already been done. And yet, in the face of unimaginable loss, Matt and Melissa Graves chose grace. They didn't sue, they didn't rage publicly. Instead, they channeled their pain into purpose. They created the Lane Thomas Foundation, a charity dedicated to helping families of children in need of organ transplants. It was their way of keeping Lane's light alive. Years have passed, but the memory of that night lingers. So many of us have stood near lakes, walked by water, let our children explore just a few feet ahead. What happened to Lane could have happened to anyone. And that's what makes this story so haunting. It wasn't a freak accident in some far-off wilderness. It was in the heart of the world's most famous theme park.
What started as a family cruise to celebrate an anniversary ended in a murder investigation. A husband charged with killing his wife while their children were nearby.
It was July 25th, 2017. The Emerald Princess, a towering luxury cruise ship, drifted through the icy waters of Alaska. On board were Kenneth and Christy Manzanares from Utah, celebrating their 18th wedding anniversary. Alongside them were their 3 daughters and extended family, a trip meant to mark nearly 2 decades of love and togetherness. But beneath the surface of smiles and scenic views, something was unraveling. Their cabin, D726, looked ordinary. But behind its door, tension had been simmering. Christy, 39, was known for her warmth and devotion to her kids. She'd hoped the trip might bring peace. Instead, it revealed how broken things had become. That night, Christy told Kenneth she wanted a divorce. She asked him to leave the ship at the next port. Kenneth told the girls to go to the next cabin. They obeyed, until they heard their mother scream. They ran to the balcony and saw Kenneth on top of Christy, beating her. He didn't stop, not even when the blood came. Her brother burst in, finding Kenneth dragging Christy toward the balcony. He stopped him just in time. Security arrived. Medics tried to save Christy, but the trauma to her head and face was fatal. Kenneth stood there, blood-covered and blank. One passenger recalled a barefoot girl screaming down the hallway. Some thought it was part of the night's murder mystery dinner. It wasn't. Kenneth was arrested when the ship docked. He first pleaded not guilty, then took a plea deal. He claimed Christy laughed at him and he snapped, but prosecutors pointed to a pattern: past outbursts, property damage, restraint. His lawyers cited brain injuries, bipolar disorder, and a mix of alcohol and meds. Judge Timothy Burgess called the act senseless and tragic, especially with the children so close. Kenneth got 30 years in federal prison, plus 5 more of supervised release. No parole, but he never served it. Months later, he was found unresponsive in his Juneau jail cell. Paramedics couldn't revive him. He was 43. No foul play was suspected, and the cause of death was never disclosed. The Emerald Princess continued sailing. Cabin D726 was cleaned and reused. But for Christy's family, the ship became a ghost. The daughters lost both parents, one to violence, the other to a jail cell and a silent death. It was June 4th, 2017, near West Yellowstone, Montana, an isolated pocket of forest where the silence feels ancient and the air tastes wild. Mike Peterson, a 42-year-old father of 4 from Bismarck, North Dakota, stood at the edge of that vast unknown. He wasn't just out for a hike, he was chasing a legend. For years, Mike had been consumed by the mystery of the forest fen treasure, a chest said to be filled with gold, jewels, and priceless artifacts, hidden somewhere between Santa Fe and the Canadian border. Like hundreds of others, he believed he was close. Maybe this time, he thought, he'd finally found the right spot. He kissed his girlfriend, Bonnie Sanger, goodbye at the trailhead that morning, wearing his bright orange vest, waders, and carrying a gun, bear spray, and enough supplies for the day. They had a plan. Meet back at the car by 6 p.m. But when Bonnie returned, Mike was gone. At first, she waited. Maybe he was delayed. Maybe he'd found something. Maybe anything. Then, at 7:20 p.m., 4 gunshots rang out in the distance. Sharp, sudden, echoing through the thick woods. She froze. Was that Mike? Was he in trouble, signaling for help? She waited, straining her ears, watching the tree line. But darkness crept in. Still no sign of him. By 8 p.m., panic took over. She drove until she found cell service and called the authorities. Search teams were deployed by 10 p.m. Helicopters equipped with infrared, trained dogs, ground crews. Everyone was looking. And yet, nothing. The next day, a trail of clues appeared. Mike's bright orange vest and bear spray were found half a mile from the creek. Then deeper in, his backpack and gun. But no footprints, no blood. Just abandoned gear in the middle of bear country. It didn't make sense. Mike was no amateur. He'd spent years in the wilderness. He knew the rules. He never strayed too far from safety. Bonnie told the search team about a strange encounter the night before. After the gunshots, she said she met a group of men who also claimed to have heard them. They were friendly, she said. Just bear hunters passing through. They supposedly helped search for Mike but didn't find anything. But that raised even more questions. Theories started swirling. Had Mike fallen victim to something more sinister? A run-in with strangers? An ambush? A wrong place, wrong time kind of moment? Or was it just a tragic miscalculation? 3 days later, the mystery took a grim turn. Mike's body was found in the creek, a quarter-mile from where his gear had been discovered. Cold, fast-moving water swollen by spring snowmelt had taken him, authorities said. Gallatin County Sheriff's Captain Jason Jarrett concluded that Mike likely drowned trying to cross it, misjudging its power, as even seasoned hikers sometimes do. But his family wasn't convinced. Days before his trip, Mike had told them he was in Denver attending a wedding. He had purposely hidden the truth, as he often did when treasure hunting. He didn't want them to worry, but it also meant that no one knew where he was. And now, they may never really know what happened. His daughter Valerie remained especially skeptical. She questioned Bonnie's story, the mysterious men in the woods, the odd gaps in the timeline. Something didn't sit right. But with no evidence of foul play, the case was closed. Officially, an accident. It was February 22, 2025, in the quiet coastal town of San Pedro, Belize. The sun rose over the Royal Cajal Beach Resort, a luxury escape known for its white sands, turquoise waters. Kawar Nakad, 23, Damani Mala, 24, Wafi Elar, 26. They had come from Massachusetts to soak in the sun, celebrate life, and make memories together. Friends back home described them as kind, ambitious, full of laughter and light. Their flight home was scheduled for the next day. Their bags were packed, but something went terribly wrong. On the morning of February 21st, hotel staff noticed something strange. None of the women had been seen since the day before. Surveillance confirmed they had entered their suite and never left. Housekeeping knocked. No answer. The next morning, still nothing. When the staff finally entered the room, they found all 3 women unresponsive. The room was still. No signs of violence. No struggle. Just 3 vibrant lives gone. First responders arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. The women were pronounced dead at the scene. A vacation that began in celebration had ended in an inexplicable tragedy. The news stunned everyone. Belize police launched an investigation. Commissioner Chester Williams gave a public statement mentioning that alcohol, vape pens, and gummies had been found in the room, but nothing illegal. He speculated that the women may have consumed something toxic. That explanation didn't sit right with their families. They knew these women. That theory didn't fit. An initial autopsy in Belize listed the cause of death as acute pulmonary edema, fluid in the lungs. But why? How? There were no answers. Their bodies were flown back to Massachusetts for a second autopsy as the families pushed for clarity. Weeks later, a strange twist emerged. A woman using the alias Jane had checked into the Royal Cajal on March 1st, unaware of what had happened just days before. Concerned for her safety, she called ahead. A hotel staff member named Daniel reassured her. The deaths, he said, were an isolated incident. She believed him. But on the 5th day of her stay, Jane woke up dizzy with a numb leg and blurred vision. When she stood, she collapsed. For nearly 40 minutes, she couldn't move. Back home, the symptoms lingered. Headaches, confusion, vision loss. She didn't know what had happened until she started reading about carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is a silent killer, odorless, invisible. It can leak from fuel-powered appliances and builds up fast in enclosed spaces. The symptoms matched. Jane reported her experience to the U.S. Embassy. A friend later told her that some rooms at the Royal Cahal had tested for dangerously high carbon monoxide levels, but the embassy stayed quiet. Then came another voice. A guest named Nana H. had stayed at the resort just before the women were found. Her personal carbon monoxide detector had gone off. Over 400 parts per million, an extremely dangerous level. She reported it to hotel staff. Their response, confused and unprepared. Under mounting pressure, Belizean officials ran environmental tests. This time, they found some rooms with readings as high as 500 parts per million, more than 10 times the maximum safe level. The danger had been real, and it had been there all along. On March 26th, the truth was confirmed. Kawar, Imani, and Wafi had died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Toxicology reports showed their blood carried over 60% carboxyhemoglobin, a fatal level. No other substances were found. The initial speculation, the assumptions, the dismissals, it had all been wrong. Their families released a joint statement filled with heartbreak and fury. How, they asked, could such a basic safety failure claim 3 young lives? How could no one have noticed? How could it take a second tragedy, nearly, for the truth to surface? The Royal Cahal Beach Resort quietly shut its doors, but the silence that killed those women still echoes. It wasn't a freak accident. It wasn't bad luck. It was preventable, and it was missed by people who should have known better. It was July 22nd, 2023. A morning just outside Yellowstone National Park on the quiet, forested stretch known as the Buttermilk Trail in Montana. She was 47, a former teacher from Darby, Kansas, who had traded in the classroom for the open road. In 2015, Amy had left her job to chase something wilder. Freedom, solitude, beauty. For years, she hiked and ran through the country's most breathtaking landscapes. She even wrote a book about it, Walking Out. One Teacher's Reflections on Walking Out of the Classroom to Walk America. Amy wasn't a novice. She knew the wilderness. She respected it. She loved it. But on that July morning, something went terribly wrong. She was alone, moving through the trail like she had hundreds of times before. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that somewhere nearby, a mother grizzly bear and her cubs were also moving silently through the brush. She didn't see them. She didn't hear them. But the bear saw her. It was a split-second mistake, a surprise, and then it was over. Around 8 a.m., another hiker stumbled upon a devastating scene. Amy's body lifeless on the trail. Her injuries were brutal. It was clear something violent had happened, and fast. Authorities were called, and soon wildlife officials confirmed what many feared. Amy had been mauled to death by a grizzly bear. Large paw prints nearby told the story that Amy could not. But the bear itself was gone, vanished back into the trees. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't stalking. This was a defensive attack, a mother protecting her cubs from a perceived threat. That's how grizzlies operate. They don't ask questions. They don't hesitate. And when they feel their young are in danger, they strike with terrifying force. Amy didn't have bear spray. And in bear country, that can be the difference between life and death. News of her death rippled through the community. Online, her mother, Janet Adamson, shared a message that no parent ever wants to write. This is probably the hardest thing I've ever had to post. Yesterday morning, we lost our beautiful, smart, and talented daughter, Amy. In interviews, she spoke of Amy's love for nature. Running through Yellowstone, she said, it was like heaven to her. Officials closed off the Buttermilk Trail. They launched a full-scale investigation, complete with helicopter flyovers and traps. But the bear was never found. In truth, they never really wanted to find her. A defensive bear isn't a rogue killer. It's a mother following instinct. Still, the danger remained, and the Forest Service warned the public. Be careful, be alert, be prepared. But the warning came too late for Amy. Her death reignited the ongoing debate about human-bear encounters, especially in Montana, where the grizzly population has been steadily growing. Conservation efforts have worked. The bears are coming back, but so are the risks. More people are hitting the trails than ever before, and sometimes that love for the wild comes with a price. Grizzlies are nothing like black bears. They're bigger, stronger, more territorial, and if you surprise a mother grizzly, there is no second chance. Experts say most of these encounters can be avoided. Carry bear spray, hike in groups, make noise as you go. Simple things, life-saving things. But Amy had none of that with her. She was alone, and the forest was quiet. That silence cost her everything. It was not a predatory attack. Wildlife officials later confirmed the bear never tried to eat her or drag her body away. That's important, because it tells us something. Amy wasn't prey. She was a perceived threat. And the bear did what bears have done for centuries when they feel cornered. It defended its young. This wasn't the first deadly encounter in the area. Just 2 years earlier, another person lost their life in a grizzly attack near West Yellowstone. The truth is hard to swallow. As the wild spaces shrink and people venture deeper into them, these tragedies are becoming more common. Nature isn't a theme park. It doesn't follow rules. It doesn't care if you're experienced, respectful, or just out for a jog. It acts without warning. In the days that followed, Amy's loved ones tried to make sense of the loss. Her mother found small comfort in knowing her daughter had died doing what she loved, running through the wild, chasing the feeling of being truly alive. She was a free spirit, Janet wrote. She died in a place she loved. It was November 27th, 2022, in San Andres, Colombia, a Caribbean paradise. 26-year-old Natalia Andrea Lagares Fajardo had traveled there from her hometown of Cali, eager to soak in the warmth, the waves, and the magic of a long-awaited escape with friends. She loved the ocean. Natalia was glowing with joy. She had spent the morning lounging on Whitewater Beach, one of the island's most popular and picturesque spots. Later, she and her friends boarded a boat to explore the coastline, laughing, dancing, taking pictures, wrapped in the easy bliss of vacation. The skies were clear. The sea was calm. No one could have imagined how quickly it would all unravel. As the boat returned to the beach, something small caught Natalia's attention. Her flip-flops had slipped off into the water, a minor inconvenience. Most people wouldn't hesitate. Neither did she. Without thinking twice, Natalia jumped in to retrieve them. She didn't know. None of them did. Just nearby, another boat was moving through the water. It was carrying 24 tourists and 2 crew members. Its engine was still running. The propeller was spinning beneath the surface, silent. Natalia swam toward her flip-flops, unaware of the danger just feet away. In the next breath, it happened. The boat's propeller struck her. The water erupted into chaos. Screams, shouting, blood. Witnesses stood frozen as the turquoise waves turned red. Natalia had been hit with terrifying force. Her legs, lower back, and hips were severely injured. The water that had once felt like freedom had suddenly become a trap. Her friends pulled her from the sea in a panic. She was barely conscious. Desperate for help, they rushed her onto a jet ski to get her to the hospital as fast as possible. Every second mattered. By 5:30 p.m., she arrived at the Departmental Hospital of San Andres. Doctors worked frantically, performing blood transfusions, emergency surgeries, doing everything they could to save her. Natalia went into cardiac arrest. For a moment, they brought her back, but her body was too broken. By the early hours of November 28th, Natalia's heart stopped again. And this time, it didn't start back up. Just like that, the trip she had so joyfully anticipated ended in the most unthinkable way. She was gone. In the days that followed, shock turned into sorrow. Colombian maritime authorities immediately immobilized the boat involved. The 2 crew members were placed under investigation, standard protocol in a tragedy like this. Officials issued renewed warnings about water safety, urging swimmers to stay clear of boats and for crews to maintain strict awareness when passengers were in the water. But for those who knew Natalia, the rules came too late. Video footage from the beach surfaced online. Chaotic, gut-wrenching, showing the confusion and terror in real time. It spread like wildfire, igniting debate across social media and beyond. How could something so small, jumping into the water for a pair of sandals, turn into a fatal decision? And the tragedy didn't end there. Just months earlier, across the sea in the Florida Keys, 31-year-old Juan Carlos Escott Alvarez had jumped into the water to save his fiancée after she fell overboard during a fishing competition. She survived. He didn't. He was struck by a propeller, too. Suddenly, people began to realize these accidents weren't random. They were preventable. Authorities began pushing for stricter regulations. Safety organizations launched awareness campaigns. But for Natalia's loved ones, none of that could bring her back. Her last day had been filled with sunshine, laughter, and good friends. Photos from hours before the accident showed her with a drink in hand, smiling, alive. No one could have known those would be her final moments. It was May 30, 2025 in northern Namibia. Bernd Kebbel, a 59-year-old German-born businessman and devoted conservationist, had come not as a tourist, but as someone who'd spent years protecting one of nature's rarest wonders, Namibia's desert-adapted lions. This was sacred ground to him. He wasn't alone. His wife, Connie, 57, was by his side, along with friends and 6 children. They traveled in 3 four-wheel drives, each with rooftop tents meant to keep them safe from predators. That night, they set up camp near the Juaneb Skeleton Coast, a final frontier for the desert lions. The stars were bright, the silence deep. It felt like the perfect end to a long day, but death was close. Around 1:30 a.m., Bernd climbed down from the tent to use the toilet. A routine moment, but just feet away, hidden in the dark, a lioness was waiting. Her name was Charlie. She was 12, old, skeletal, starving. Her ribs stuck out like bones through paper. Once featured in wildlife documentaries, Charlie had grown desperate and had lost her fear of humans. The moment Bernd touched the ground, she pounced. Her jaws sank into his neck. She dragged him into the brush. It happened so fast, so silently, no one noticed, until Connie woke to strange sounds. Then she heard her husband's voice, faint and terrified, followed by a growl. She scrambled down the ladder. In the dark, she saw it, Charlie dragging Bernd's lifeless body away. Without hesitation, Connie ran toward the lioness. She grabbed a metal pole and began striking her. She screamed, fought, and even tried to rip off Charlie's leather tracking collar. Another camper arrived and hit the lioness with a flashlight. Finally, Charlie backed off into the dark, but it was too late. Bernd had died almost instantly. The camp was paralyzed with fear. No one slept. The children cried. Adults sat in shock. And then, Charlie came back. She circled the vehicles, growling, pretending to charge. The group huddled inside, afraid to move. The next night, Charlie struck again, this time at a nearby camp. She shredded a tent, clawing and biting through it. Footage later showed the damage. She wasn't just hungry, she had become a threat. Namibia's Ministry of Environment launched an investigation. On June 1st, just 2 days later, they found Charlie resting under a bush. She was put down that morning. Connie later spoke publicly. She said they had come to terms with it, that she and Bernd never wanted Charlie to die. They had loved this land too deeply, but the wild had turned against them. Locals called Connie a hero, a woman who ran at a lioness and lived. A safari guide who knew them said, few people could face a lion and survive, but Connie did. Only around 60 desert-adapted lions remain in Cunene, fewer than 800 across Namibia. Their habitat is vanishing, their prey disappearing. And when desperation sets in, even sacred ground becomes deadly. Bernd had spent years trying to protect that balance. He funded conservation teams, supported researchers like Dr. Philip Flip Stander, and even had a lion named Kebbel in his honor, though it too had to be put down for safety. He also owned the off-road center in Windhoek, supplying safari gear and supporting ecotourism. After the tragedy, his children, Deer and Heidi, returned from South Africa to be with their mother. Authorities confirmed Bernd's death. Campers had tried to help, but it happened too fast. Namibia lost a protector, the desert lost a lioness, and Connie, she lost her partner in the very place he loved most.
This is the first time this has happened, by the way, since 1986. A grizzly bear killed a man in the park Wednesday morning.
It was March 23rd, 2022 in Paradise Valley, Montana. 40-year-old Craig Cloitre laced up his boots, zipped up his jacket, and stepped into that silence, unaware it would be the last hike he would ever take. Craig wasn't a tourist. He had lived in Montana for over 2 decades, a father of 4. A man who didn't just enjoy the outdoors, he belonged to it. He had ice-climbed frozen waterfalls, hiked remote trails, and chased the thrill of adventure since childhood. On that morning, he and a friend had ventured into the 6 Mile Creek area, just north of Yellowstone. It was rugged, steep country, untamed and beautiful, the kind of place where the trees are thick and the mountains watch you from above. They agreed to split up for a while, probably searching for shed antlers, something Craig enjoyed doing in the spring thaw. They would meet back at the car later, but Craig never showed. At first, maybe it was just a delay. Maybe he found a new trail. Maybe he lost track of time. But when the sun began to fall behind the mountains and his friend was still alone, the fear set in. He called for help. Search teams came quickly. Foot crews, helicopters, dogs. The terrain was brutal. Cold air, dense forest, sheer ridges. 2 long days passed. Then came the news. Craig had been found. He was gone. The Park County Sheriff confirmed what many had feared. Craig had encountered a grizzly bear, and he hadn't survived. It is with a very heavy heart that I am writing this update, Sheriff Brad Bickler said. It appears he had an encounter with a grizzly and unfortunately did not survive. Please keep his family in your thoughts and prayers. Craig's wife, Jamie, was shattered. Just 2 years earlier, they had lost nearly everything in a house fire. He had been rebuilding, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, trying to give his family a stable home again. Now, another tragedy, one they never saw coming. Jamie posted a message online, raw with pain. I loved him with every fiber of me. He was a vital part of our family, and it is going to be a struggle for the rest of our lives. To say we are broken is an understatement, and how could they not be? The Livingston community rallied. Friends, neighbors, even strangers donated to a GoFundMe campaign that raised more than $100,000. People remembered Craig not just as an adventurer, but as a protector, a man who worked at the Grizzly and Wolf Discovery Center, who educated others about wildlife and safety. He wasn't reckless. He understood the dangers. He respected them. And still, it wasn't enough. This wasn't a bear hunting through a campsite. It wasn't provoked. It was just a tragic crossing of paths. One moment, one encounter, and everything changed. Wildlife officials collected hair samples to confirm the attack. There was no plan to track or kill the bear. It hadn't hunted Craig. It had simply done what wild animals do. But that doesn't make it any easier to accept. Jamie spoke of his love for mountains. The high peaks of Montana and Idaho, the summits of Utah. He had so many plans. Wind River Range was next. He lived with a spark that most people only dream of touching. He knew the wild, and the wild knew him. But on that day, even all his experience wasn't enough to bring him home. Friends like Ann Tanner still can't believe it. He was finally just getting their house together, she said through tears. I can't believe he would lose his life in the wilderness. He was so strong, so smart. In the days that followed, the pain didn't ease, but the love poured in. By the end of March, over $120,000 had been raised for Jaime and the children. It wouldn't bring him back, but it showed just how many lives Craig had touched. His story is not one of recklessness or carelessness. It's a story about love, about rebuilding after loss, about trusting the land you call home, and about the cruel unpredictability of nature, no matter how prepared you are.
2 British men and their Russian guide died while on a fishing expedition in Russia's Murmansk region on Sunday morning after being struck by their helicopter's rotor.
It was Sunday morning in 2013, deep within the Arctic Circle. Eurocopter EC-120 descended toward the frozen wilderness of Russia's remote Kola Peninsula. This wasn't just any destination. It was a secret haven for the world's wealthiest fishermen, where people paid thousands to cast lines into pristine rivers under untouched skies. On board were 3 men: Rupert Beaumont, a 69-year-old retired London lawyer, Mark Robertson, also 69, a fine art dealer, and their 53-year-old Russian guide, Alexander Tushnikov, an experienced Arctic expedition leader. For Rupert and Mark, this was the trip of a lifetime. Rupert, once a key figure in the Barings Bank scandal fallout, had traded courtrooms for calm waters. His son, James, was flying just behind them in a second helicopter. Everything had been meticulously arranged. The Eurocopter was chosen for its modern safety features. It was June, peak salmon season. Conditions were ideal. But the Arctic doesn't care for perfect plans. The pilot, Alexander Shabalin, a 25-year veteran, began descent near the Rinda River, beside a high-end fishing lodge. The terrain looked stable. It wasn't. As the skids touched down, one wheel sank into the marsh. The aircraft tipped sharply. Rotor blades, still spinning, dropped low, too low. In a blink, the unthinkable happened. Rupert, Mark, and Alexander had just stepped out, likely stretching their legs. Then the blade swept through them. There was no time to react. All 3 died instantly. From above, James watched it happen. The sudden tip, the chaos, the silence that followed. His father was gone before he even landed. Photos later showed the helicopter crumpled on its side, rotors twisted and bloodied, white snow stained red. The peaceful camp transformed in an instant. The pilot survived with minor injuries and radioed for help, but it was already too late. At first, there was talk of mechanical failure or weather, but soon focus shifted. Did the pilot misjudge the ground, try to lift off too soon? Russia's investigative committee launched a full inquiry. Conflicting witness statements and Shabalin's own account raised suspicion. A criminal case was opened. If found responsible, the pilot faced up to 10 years in prison. One report suggested the victims were struck not while landing, but during an attempted takeoff. Either way, the soft ground had betrayed them. Rupert wasn't just a vacationer. He was a revered legal mind. Friends called him sharp, kind, and generous. Mark was a quiet but respected figure in the art world. Their guide, Alexander, was beloved in the fishing community and trusted by international travelers. And then, all 3 were gone. The British Foreign Office confirmed the deaths. Rupert's wife, Susie, flew from Australia to Russia to be with their son. The The grief was immeasurable. The Kola Peninsula had become a go-to destination for elite anglers, remote, pristine, and only reachable by air. But that same remoteness came with risk. On that Arctic morning, in a place meant to offer peace, 3 lives were erased by a single misstep.
I can't hold my breath long enough to tell you everything I love about you. Will you please be my wife? That's when something went wrong. Weber swims away and he never resurfaces.
It was September 19th, 2019 in Tanzania. 40-year-old Stephen Weber Jr. from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was on a once-in-a-lifetime vacation with his girlfriend, Kenesha Antoine. They had chosen the stunning Manta Resort, an exclusive escape off the coast of Pemba Island. Their room wasn't just oceanfront, it was underwater. A glass-walled cabin submerged beneath the sea, surrounded by marine life, like something out of a dream. It cost $1,700 a night. But for Stephen, this was more than a luxury trip. It was a love story reaching its most beautiful chapter. He had something planned, something unforgettable. For 2 years, Stephen and Kenesha had shared adventures, laughter, and love. And here, beneath the Indian Ocean, he was ready to take the next step. He prepared a handwritten note, carefully sealed in a plastic bag. Alongside it, an engagement ring. His plan was simple, yet bold. Swim outside the submerged suite, hold the message up to the glass, and propose through the window. It would be romantic, intimate, perfect. And for a brief, shining moment it was. Kenesha stood inside the room, filming the moment with excitement bubbling in her voice. Through the window, she saw Stephen swimming toward her, smiling, laughing. He held up the note. On one side, a message. He couldn't hold his breath long enough to say everything he loved about her, but what he did love only grew each day. Then he flipped it. The proposal. Will you marry me? Finally, he reached for the ring, showing it through the glass, his expression full of joy. Then, he was gone. Stephen swam out of view, presumably to head back to the surface. Kenesha waited, smiling, excited, but seconds turned into minutes, and the joy slowly twisted into fear. Stephen never came back up. Panic set in. Kenesha called out, tried the radio, the phone, nothing. Frantic, she flagged down passing boaters for help. When staff finally arrived and searched the water, they found Stephen, but it was too late. He was unconscious. Barely clinging to life, despite desperate efforts to resuscitate him, he was pronounced dead not long after being pulled from the ocean. He never got to hear her answer. But it was yes. 1,000 times, yes. In the days that followed, Kenesha posted a heartbreaking tribute online. Her words were filled with pain, disbelief, and love. She called him a beautiful soul. She shared how they had laughed just hours before, how Stephen had told her he felt lucky to be experiencing such a magical place with her. He was grateful. He was in love. And then he was gone. But for Stephen's family, grief quickly tangled with confusion. He had been a strong swimmer, experienced, adventurous. Why didn't he make it back? What went wrong? His sister, Mandy Hoffman, raised the same questions publicly. Could there have been a hidden danger, a medical issue, a delay in rescue? The Manta Resort issued a statement calling it a tragic accident. Conditions were calm, the water about 10 meters deep. He had been free diving alone, but for the people left behind, that wasn't enough. How does a moment so filled with joy end like this? The resort's CEO expressed sorrow, but the truth is no one had answers, only loss and silence. Stephen's death rocked everyone who knew him. Friends remembered his joy, his energy, the way he made people feel seen, loved. A GoFundMe was set up to help bring his body home. It raised over $177,000. Even the U.S. State Department stepped in to assist. But the mystery remains. Why didn't Stephen make it? Was it a breath misjudged? A sudden cramp? Something that could have been prevented? His family still doesn't know. They probably never will. But what they do know is this. Stephen Weber Jr. died trying to give the woman he loved the most unforgettable proposal of her life. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. But on July 25, 2019, 19-year-old Alana Cutland fell from the skies above Madagascar, plummeting 3,700 feet into the dense, unforgiving jungle. What began as a bold journey of research and discovery ended in one of the most baffling and heartbreaking tragedies in recent tourism history. Alana wasn't just another tourist. She was a brilliant second-year student at Cambridge University, studying natural sciences. Her passion for nature wasn't just academic, it was deeply personal. She dreamed of studying rare species and pushing the boundaries of what young minds could achieve. So when the opportunity came to travel alone to Madagascar to study a little-known species of crustaceans, she took it. funding the trip herself, determined to carve her own path. Those who knew her best described her as curious, courageous, and full of life. Bright-eyed, fiercely independent, and endlessly driven, Alana was the kind of young woman who chased dreams to the edges of the earth. But no one could have predicted what would unfold just 8 days into her research trip. Alone in the remote Anjahavi region, Alana's condition began to unravel. What started as subtle changes turned quickly into something more disturbing. She became paranoid, disoriented, and erratic. Her phone calls home were scattered and confused, her words barely making sense. Thousands of miles away, her family grew alarmed. Something was clearly wrong. They didn't know if it was the isolation, the environment, or the medication she was taking, but they knew she had to come home, fast. Her parents made urgent arrangements to fly her out. A small Cessna was chartered to take her from the isolated lodge to the capital city, where she could catch a flight back to England. On board the plane were just 3 people: the pilot, a trusted family friend named Ruth Johnson, and Alana. What happened next is almost too shocking to believe. Just minutes after takeoff, the nightmare began. Alana, visibly unwell, unbuckled her seatbelt and lunged for the door mid-flight. At 3,700 feet in the air, panic took over. Ruth and the pilot fought desperately to restrain her, pleading with her, holding her back. But she was frantic, overcome by something beyond reason, and in one terrifying moment, she broke free. She opened the door, and she fell. Silence followed. Stunned, deafening silence. The plane kept flying, but Alana was gone. Her body vanished into the thick jungle below. For days, search teams combed through unforgiving terrain, battling heat, wild animals, and impossible odds. Her family waited, helpless, from across the world. Eventually, it was a local tribe that found her remains, offering a sliver of closure in a story full of pain. But the questions only deepened. Why would a brilliant, level-headed young woman take such a sudden and horrifying action? Investigators looked closely at everything: her mental state, her medications, the conditions of her stay, and one clue stood out: doxycycline. The anti-malaria medication Alana had been prescribed is widely used, but in rare cases it can cause severe psychological side effects. Hallucinations, paranoia, even suicidal thoughts. Her family believes this was the trigger, a devastating reaction that spiraled out of control. Her uncle, Lester Riley, spoke openly after her death, saying Alana's last phone calls were completely incoherent. They were desperate to get her out, but by then, the damage may have already been done. And yet, this isn't just a story about a pill, or a plane, or a fall. It's about the silent pressure so many young travelers face. The weight of being far from home, the isolation of remote research, the fear of admitting something's wrong. Alana was passionate, but she was also alone. And in the end, her fight wasn't just against the physical danger around her, but the invisible battle within.